Welcome to the Zero Pressure podcast, a relaxed conversation with those on the cutting edge of science and technology, hosted by me, Helen Sharman, and presented by Imperial College London and Saab. I've had the privilege of working as a scientist and manager in industry and academia, though I'm better known as the first British astronaut for my time in space on the Mir space station. It was that experience that kick-started in me a passion for science to be more widely discussed. Coming up in today's episode, we focus on the future of artificial intelligence.
The interesting part is also that the AI can handle so much data, so actually it kind of exceeds the human capabilities in a certain sense for certain tasks.
So yeah, we as humans have to be able to put the appropriate boundaries on it. It's not unlike what you would do with your toddler at home. You set up fences around that child to make sure that it is learning the things you want it to learn.
But first, if you're a new listener, let me tell you about the Zero Pressure podcast. Zero Pressure looks at how science and technology can contribute to solving the complex, interrelated global challenges of today and tomorrow. We investigate pioneering technologies and speak to thinkers and doers at the leading edge. How can science and technology serve as enablers of the greater good, socially, environmentally, in terms of improving global resilience, and for the long term? The podcast has a special focus on security, be that protection for individuals, nations, or the whole Earth, cyber or physical, from aerospace to deep ocean technology. In our previous episode on autonomous systems, we had a fascinating discussion on how programmed systems make decisions that impact our lives, from mundane everyday items like thermostats all the way through to future warfare systems such as autonomous missile drones. If you missed it, you might want to give it a listen. Now, autonomous systems are intrinsically linked to today's topic, artificial intelligence. So I'm really excited to dive into AI and explore some of the implications for autonomous systems more widely. The use of AI has developed at breakneck speed over the last decade, but AI as a technology is still quite rudimentary. The first wave started in the late 1950s and 60s with statistics-based systems. The second wave is also known as machine learning, where systems learn from their own output. I reckon it's what most of us think of when we hear the term artificial intelligence. But the third wave of AI is just beginning. It's supposed to allow machines to contextualize data points, which is what humans do all the time, like when we just know what a road sign means, even if it's covered in dirt and hardly visible. And third wave AI systems should be able to explain their decision-making, becoming more transparent to us humans. Is this third wave really feasible? Where do we stand regarding the development underpinning this technology? What might the applications of third wave AI look like? And what would they mean for geopolitics? First, I thought about bees, the buzzy insects that help pollinate flowers, giving us food crops, cotton, and of course honey. The World Bee Project is using artificial intelligence to save our little fuzzy friends. The bee population is in decline, and that's bad news for us as well as the insects. But the World Bee Project is gathering data through the Internet of Things, with sensors, microphones and cameras on hives. The data is analysed by artificial intelligence to identify patterns or trends. AI makes it easier to share real-time information around the world that could direct early interventions to help the bees survive. Our first guest is Tero Ojanperä, Executive Chairman and co-founder of Silo AI, the largest private AI lab in the Nordic countries. Tero has board and chairman level experience of a number of digital and other technology companies, not least at Nokia, as well as being a part-time professor of practice at Aalto University. At Silo AI, which he co-founded, Tero's artificial intelligence interests focus on building human-centric AI to accelerate human-machine cooperation for collective intelligence that emerges through collaboration between humans and machines. This enables development of autonomous vehicles, automation in industry and smart devices, networks and cities. So Tero, welcome to Zero Pressure.
Thank you.
Now, I know it might sound a bit odd to ask at the beginning of something so complicated, but I think it's useful for many of us who've seen and heard of artificial intelligence. You know, there's a lot of misinformation out there. What actually is AI in your view?
Yeah, there is no one definition, but I could maybe start by that. When you think about the input and output, that the AI is actually learning from data. So it's kind of given examples of data. It will learn to derive the answer. So if you want to detect, for example, financial fraud, you need to give examples of the fraud, and it learns from them and develops a model which is based on the algorithm. So that then, given a new data, it will then detect the fraud if there is such a thing. So in that sense, the AI it's not programmed like a traditional software. If then else is the traditional software, but it is really learning to find the right answer given data. So that's one. But you can also classify AI in a different ways. That there is machine learning, which is the most commonly actually known AI as of today, or the one that is mostly used. But you can also talk about NLP, natural language processing, which is focused on understanding natural language. And then you can talk about computer vision, which is of course focused on understanding the video and our surroundings, the visual, from the visual perspective. But typically, you actually combine these different disciplines of AI into a solution that then will try to act intelligently and first imitate human behavior, but actually go even beyond that.
Ooh, imitate human behavior. So this sounds, I mean, we're quite complex, aren't we? We like to think as though perhaps nothing could be as complicated as us. So do you think we really can get something that can imitate us sufficiently that we couldn't tell the difference?
Yeah, in the future, definitely, and already today we have solutions that where you can tell the difference. The interesting part is also that the AI can handle so much data, so actually it kind of exceeds the human capabilities in a certain sense for certain tasks, that where human cannot digest huge amounts of massive amounts of data and draw conclusions based on that one. But in some other sense, it kind of falls short of human behavior. If human learns to recognize animals, then if you teach an AI to recognize a cat, then it fails to recognize a dog or cannot tell that what is a dog. So in that sense, it's still far from the human behavior, but our capabilities. But at the same time, I believe that the further along we go, the better the AI will get, and it kind of starts to behave like a human that is learning first for specific tasks, but maybe then later going beyond those tasks where it originally was starting from.
So will the machine do it on its own somehow decide to go beyond, or will that always be under the control of the human?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That can AI become a generic learner, that it would actually learn to expand itself infinitely and even take over, as we have learned from science fiction? I personally don't believe that we are going that far, but definitely the AI capabilities will develop to such direction that we can at least transfer learnings or AI's capabilities from one domain to another, and maybe it could happen even automatically as it learns from new data in the future.
So tell me a bit more about what you mean about transferring from one domain to another. How will that work?
In a simple ways, it's like using this example of recognizing cats, then going and recognizing dogs, then recognizing kangaroos or some other animals. And then the question is that can the AI actually abstract this information in a way that there is such a thing as animal, and there are different animals. So it's of course one domain, but it's already quite complex task that it would learn to, starting from the cats to recognize all kinds of animals and their races and species, etc. But I believe that the AI is progressing into such direction that this kind of learning and abstraction in the more generic level and then applying that into a new domain is becoming possible, but we are still in the very early stage in that direction.
So is this all part of this new so-called third wave about sort of generalizing and contextualizing, I think the terms are, aren't they?
Exactly. Yeah, it is definitely. We are talking about third wave, and it's about abstracting, it's about reasoning and understanding in some sense as the humans do, but we are in the early stage of the third wave, but that's what makes it interesting.
Now, we're using these words, understanding and reasoning, and of course they're words that we know what we mean when we do these things, but is a computer working in the same way as humans do when we talk about reasoning and decision making?
Not really, in a sense. There are some similarities, but of course we don't really understand fully how humans work or how do they learn. We have some understanding, and of course there are theories and which have been verified empirically, but at the same time the human mind is a mystery in some sense. And in that sense, the computer, it's not really imitating what humans are doing. The first wave of AI or the second wave is like a simple statistical learning that, like I described in the beginning, you give examples and the computer is able to derive an abstraction based on those ones so that it will recognize similar examples, even though they are not the same. So it's still quite simple. And when we then kind of add that, can we add the capability to learn and move beyond the original task? That's where the hard part begins. And when human is able to do pretty fast, if you think about the child, when child is learning, they move from one task to another based on examples, even though they never saw the other task in real life. But computer to do so, it's much more difficult, and we are still in the early stage of trying to figure out even the basic simple cases that where it could do so. We started with a lot of experiments, proof of concepts, like people call them, that you test AI in the lab conditions, you get very excited about it, can solve the problem. But the hard part is that this lab to field gap is actually rather large, that even if it works on the lab with the test data very well, when you put it into the field, then the data might be a totally different quality. It doesn't work well. You might not have enough connectivity and computing capacity. And at the same time, when you deploy an AI system, the work doesn't there. Like in a traditional software, you develop, you deploy, and it's supposed to operate like it was specified. With AI, the system needs to evolve. And in order to really get the true benefit, you need to constantly develop and feed new data so it can learn from it.
Now, you understand all the technology that goes on behind this, but I certainly wouldn't. I think many people out there are happy to use devices that we don't really understand what goes on inside. But there's this idea about the third wave being somehow more transparent. Does that mean transparent to all of us? So I should be able to understand what decisions my car's taking? Or does it just mean that somebody like you, who really is able to understand the technology, completely gets it? Or is everybody going to have to get a degree in computer science to be able to work with stuff?
Well, let's put it that way, that I hope not everybody will need to get the computer science degree, but it is really the computer scientists who should think about that. How do I make AI transparent and explainable to the normal people? Let's put it that way. Even you cannot really understand the inner workings of the AI, you can still explain the factors why it decided like it decided. And it is our duty to build systems that where these algorithms, how they work, that we try to make them transparent, we try to make them explainable. So even if the algorithm is very complex, like deep neural networks, cannot actually explain exactly how the decision, but you can say that these were the factors that influenced the decision, that if you are applying a loan, it cannot be a black box. You need to get an explanation that these factors contributed you to getting this loan with these terms, or if you are applying a job, there is a certain feedback, what type of the AI was used to select the candidates, etc. I think this is one of the areas where there's a lot of research going at the moment, but also practical sort of the experiments that what's the best way of, for example, visualize the way how AI decides what it decides. And this brings us to the question of trust and emotions, that because if we don't understand how AI works, it might be hard for us to trust that the decision it makes. If I'm an expert operating a factory, and the computer, the AI tells that there's going to be a problem in the next 24 hours and you should shut down the factory or order a prepare crew. I might just say that I know this better than the AI. I have working here for 30 years. I trust my guts, so I don't trust the AI. Or in some cases, you might actually trust it too much. It might be that you say that it's AI, it's definitely right. You have a blind trust. You think about the black box. It's there and it tells you the answer. So it could be either way. And then the emotions that in some companies we have observed that when you deploy AI, it might even hurt identities of the people because they think that the job that I was able to do earlier, the computer is now able to do part of it. So it might actually hurt your identity. So these are kind of the things that we need to also take into account when we deploy AI systems and think about the human side.
So does that mean we're going to become, I suppose, in the end, more reliant on AI? Can you foresee a time when somehow the AI might fail us? I mean, what are the risks associated, the errors of AI going wrong?
I think the main risk is probably that we apply AI into areas where it is not enough developed. That we think that AI is mature, but and it is performing extremely well, and we deploy it into a field, and then it doesn't perform that well, and then we get disappointment, or we even make a fatal mistakes. As such, I don't think AI is that different from any other technology. That there always have been problems in sort of the deploying new technology, that people resist it. Some people are overly eager to go ahead. But in that sense, the learning capability of AI makes it different, that you need to really take that into account. And I believe that AI being capable of going beyond human capabilities already now in a certain areas makes it kind of special. And in that sense, we should think about that when deploying it in a mass scale.
It's just really quite awesome, I think, and how fast it's all happening. I'm going to ask you some very quick questions now. See if you can answer me in one word or just a few. A bit of fun. Does artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence pose a risk to humanity, do you think?
No.
I like that. What's the biggest challenge in making AI more human-like? Do we need it to be more human-like, perhaps?
It's the learning capability or imitating the human learning capability.
And how can we make artificial intelligence appear friendly to us?
It's giving AI a more social capabilities.
Thank you very much, Tero. Stay with us and we'll come back to you shortly. So Tero was talking about us being in the early stages of this third new wave now. And the really big deal is that we test artificial intelligence in the lab conditions. And then when we take it out into the field, it's just such a huge jump to get there because real life is really very complicated. I just want to mention that you can submit your comments and questions on the podcast Twitter @ZeroPressurePod, where we'll post answers. We may even feature your questions in the next episode. It'd be great to hear from you. Our second guest is Dr. Karen Haig. Karen has a wealth of experience in AI and machine learning across a variety of applications, and she's just released a book entitled Cognitive Electronic Warfare, an AI Approach. Karen has a particular focus on the use of AI in aerospace, defence and communication systems. Since her PhD at Carnegie Mellon University, she's pioneered work in numerous AI fields, including autonomous vehicles, smart homes for elderly care, and cognitive radio frequency communication systems. Hello, Karen, and welcome to Zero Pressure.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Look forward to this.
Now, tell me, how is artificial intelligence technology helpful in the defense sector at the moment?
Well, broadly speaking, AI is just a tool. I map it to mathematics. It's just like math. It's a set of tools that you can apply to problems. So it really does apply to just about everything that can be done in any system, whether that's commercial or military. Remote, rugged environments like the Mars rover. So if you're looking at, the critical defense sector items, that you're often looking at situations where they have hard real-time operating constraints, things that must happen in very tight time frames. And they have to operate typically on fairly small embedded devices. You don't have the cloud. You can't go back to the cloud to do the huge computations. So you've got low power, you've got small space to do your computation, and you still have to make good decisions and come up with the right answer. That's one of the big differences. The other major difference that you will see between the defense sector and the commercial industry is the number of data points. In these remote environments, whether it's the Mars rover or a military situation, you're looking at sometimes no previous training examples. You have to learn in the field. You're doing real-time in-mission learning, and there are systems that will go out with no data at all. So that Mars rover doesn't have time to come back to Earth to ask about every decision that it's making. And who knows, it may encounter something that it's never seen before, no matter how well trained it was on Earth before it left.
Can we combine the two? So, I don't know, you use systems that have got some experience in the civilian world with what you might want to do in the military application?
Absolutely. There's lots and lots of mapping that you can do as these things go forward. One of the best places where you'll see the intersection is in the safety critical systems. So things like the flight safety and what have you. Aircraft have been using AI systems since the 1960s. So every time you get on an airplane, there is a lot of AI going on inside that aircraft. And as you're looking at safety critical systems where there are literally human lives at stake, it has to be able to make the right decisions. And you really don't want to let accidents happen because things are not well understood or not well controlled.
Can you use, I'm trying to imagine a scenario where you've got, let's say, a drone or just some sort of surveillance that could be used for both applications at the same time. You could have it in the military field, but it could actually also be acquiring data for, I don't know, for some mapping that might not be military at all.
Yeah, no, there absolutely are cases like that. Radar is a great example. Weather radar is also used as aerial control for whether that's FAA or missile defense. So there's absolutely applications where the data is being used for the same purposes across the board.
So has this third wave started to affect the defence sector applications yet?
Well, the term the third wave, as far as I know, really came out of the Defence Research Branch, DARPA, about 5 or 10 years ago. But the concepts have existed for a very long time. The third wave is really that ability to understand the context and explain what's happening in the environment, rather than just saying, here's an object or what have you. The ability to pull in explanations and add a layer of context, symbolic concepts that a human being would understand, I think has really changed the way that we are willing to look at and use AI. Typically, as I said, AI has been around since the 1950s and 60s, and we use it in everything we do. And it's just a question of how visible it is to the end users. Your cell phone has facial recognition technology, and that's AI.
Doesn't recognize me very well, I have to say. But there we go.
Well, that's one of those places that we start falling into the traps of the data, and that's facial recognition systems are typically very good at recognizing white men. The rest of us, not so much.
Whoa! So that's what they've been trained to do. Presumably, that's the data they've been fed.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to be very careful with the data collection and make sure it is capturing the diversity of the situations that you expect the system to encounter.
Which is really tough then if you've not been able to train your military application before it gets out in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why there's a lot of work being done in what they call zero-shot learning or transfer learning and the real-time in-mission learning. These are all mechanisms that look at the cases where you have almost no training data. And there's some really nice work being done in terms of being able to estimate how far out of your domain of expertise you are. So let's say you know something very, very well. You've trained on, pictures of mammals, and you're very good at mammals. Now you're suddenly thrown an amphibian. Just how different is that amphibian picture from the rest of it? And being able to say, having the system stand up and say, okay, well, I think it's one of these things, but I don't really know what I'm talking about is important.
So there is then a degree of uncertainty. I suppose we're all becoming familiar with hearing about coronavirus figures that include confidence intervals. Do we have something similar going on with what you've described?
Yes, absolutely. No, the domain of expertise is the one of the common terms applied to this, and it's really the ability to introspect and evaluate what the model knows about itself. And there's some very nice work being done in that area.
How close are we to a system being able to delete its own bad data then? So let's say it's learned that actually it was fed something that isn't really relevant in this situation. Will it delete that bit of old data?
I have fielded systems that do exactly that, being able to look at data that is either old or maybe it was trained on a synthetic system, because you can do an awful lot with synthetic data. You're now out in the field, being able to recognize that this was synthetic data that is biasing you incorrectly out in the field and being able to throw that out. At the end of the day, the critical point is to maintain diversity in your data set so that you're really covering all of the bases. You want a good foundation of concepts while still being able to focus on what is currently happening.
Are we saying then that possibly in the future, artificial intelligence could be less biased than humans, even though we've kind of set up the AI in the first place?
Assuming that we set up the AI to be able to do this, yes. The joy of computer science and any type of empirical model is really the structure that you give it. And we are human. We are the ones programming these systems. If we don't put the appropriate constraints and environment, the training environment around that system, it's not going to learn. And there's some wonderful examples of, that chatbot that got incredibly rude because of the training data it was given. So yeah, we as humans have to be able to put the appropriate boundaries on it. It's not unlike what you would do with your toddler at home. You set up fences around that child to make sure that it is learning the things you want it to learn.
Yeah, and of course, just for people who don't know, chatbots are those things that often pop up on your computer screen, aren't they? They to all intents and purposes behave as though they were a real human, but it's not. It's just some program that's giving you some text or possibly even some natural language, but it's reacting to your input as though as a human might.
Right. Exactly.
So we've talked about low level in some respects systems because you're saying they have to be light and they're not very much power. They have very little data. I was wondering actually if we're ever going to get to the stage where we'll have artificial intelligence actually managing missions out in the field in warfare. Is that just too much for the kind of systems that we've got now? Is that just very futuristic?
No, it is absolutely not futuristic. And there's been some what they call battle management tools being developed for now 30 or more years that come together to pull all these ideas together. It becomes really interesting as you look at the logistics supply chain, as you look at the coordination of different teams. Different teams of individuals will have different skills, and being able to pull that all together and coordinate and make sure you're accomplishing the goals is a really important thing to do. One of the nicest examples it's a civilian application, but being able to handle natural disasters. As a scenario, if you imagine the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, that was a multinational force of military people that came together. It was all your local first responders, the fire and health. It was local volunteers and maybe volunteers that had come in from other areas. So you've got that healthcare, critical infrastructure, you've got food distribution, and you're trying to make sure that the victims that are buried under the rubble are getting pulled out. You want the appropriate medical triage on those individuals. You want food being given to people who have no access to food. And at the same time, you've got to worry about all of the nefarious users, the black marketeers that are trying to steal the supplies and sell them. So you're looking at the whole system. How can you coordinate everybody, make sure that everything is happening appropriately and the people who need the help are getting the help they need?
Fascinating. Now, much of your recent work focuses on electronic warfare, which of course, is not just warfare using any old electronic bit of kit. It's quite specific, isn't it? Tell us what you mean by electronic warfare and how artificial intelligence is incorporated into that now.
So electronic warfare is the broad concept of using the radio frequency spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum, to conduct operations. So you're trying to maintain communications, you're trying to understand what you're seeing in your radar systems. So you want to be able to manage that, make sure that your radar detections are accurate, make sure that your communications are high quality. And at the same time, coming back to the Haiti example, you're looking at trying to make sure that people who should not be in the network are blocked from accessing it. So being able to do jamming of those black marketeers. So you're looking at all of the understanding of what is happening in that radio spectrum, and at the same time making appropriate decisions about how to interact with your teammates and other radio emitters in the environment.
Now, some countries against integrating artificial intelligence into defence, even though they're capable. Or is everybody just thinking that it's this is just such a capability they have to go for it?
I think that there's two answers to that. The first is you can't not have AI, because AI is just a tool. It's a set of mathematics-based tools that get integrated into systems. They are methods to come up with solutions to the problems you're facing. That said, it is certainly a trend across the whole globe that people are bringing in the more advanced AI capabilities to be able to do the decision-making and situation assessment that is crucial in this world. We are looking at a space of things that the speed of decision-making has to be extremely fast, and the complexity is typically much higher than what humans are capable of doing. And so, broadly speaking, people are looking at this as the leg up that will put people in an advanced position, should conflicts arise.
And is this going to reset the balance of power in any way, do you think?
Technology resets the balance of power, doesn't matter what kind of technology it is. So yes, and it's just a matter of how that will grow and change over time.
What do you think artificial intelligence is going to do for defence? I mean, will it make the world a safer place? Will it stop us from having boots on the ground at all, do you think?
I don't think it will stop boots on the ground in the same way as we're all human. We have a desire to fight for reasons that are beyond my level of understanding. AI really, at the end of the day, will be something that falls into the category of assistive technology. Right now, we rely on individuals who've been trained in whatever boot camps and equivalent to be able to stay up for 24 or 36 hours and still make good decisions in bad weather. And being able to use automated sensing techniques that are more accurate no matter what the weather conditions, and who don't get tired. I trust my teenager to drive, and I don't quite know why. I would much rather have a Tesla driving instead of handing the car keys to my teenager. And that is absolutely equivalently true in the global conflict situations.
So it's a force for good, do you think, overall?
I hope so. I mean, that's the truth of it. All scientists like their technology to be used for good, or at least most do.
Yeah, fabulous. Now, two questions here. Quick rapid fire answers, a bit of fun. Could you envisage a future artificial intelligence or autonomous system disobeying orders?
No.
And could AI help bring about world peace?
No.
Oh, that's sad.
No, I would love it to happen. And climate change. I would love AI to fix the climate problem. But no, we are unfortunately humans driven by testosterone and other hormonal features that add up to problems. We are human. We will have conflict.
So we are still controlling the machines. This is the whole thing. So this is what you're both telling me, that, but we can interact with them, and together, hopefully, we'll improve life in one way, shape, or form.
Hopefully, yes. That would be my goal.
Super, Karen. Thank you. So, Karen, stay with us. I'm just going to bring Tero back in now. So, Tero, what would you say is perhaps the main factor that we need to consider in terms of this public perception of trust and getting people to perceive artificial intelligence as something that we really can work with?
I think education is one key, that we basically need to make people understand what AI is already from the young age. It's so common technology nowadays that it should be part of the basic education. I think that's the first step. And then as part of that, we would need to reposition the AI. It's not about AI taking over, but it is about AI supporting people in their daily work, helping to solve big problems, and in this way making a world a better place. So it's about rethinking how we perceive AI.
And Karen, do you think there's a difference because of the defense aspect, that people might feel differently about AI in defense than they do in their everyday lives?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with what Tero just said. Education and the casting it as a supportive, assistive technology are both huge deals. I think one of the major factors is being able to recognize that trust is a function of risk. So, if you're just looking at objects and trying to classify them, there is much less risk than when you hand the car keys over to the Tesla to actually drive down the road. And being able to build up those layers so that people are interacting as they go along will help tremendously with that perception. I mean, if you think about it, modern cars, many of them now have the adjustable cruise control and the lane following. That is kind of the lowest level of building up trust in autonomous vehicles. And the same holds true in whatever we're working with.
So we talked about education. I mean, Tero, can you see us actually teaching AI in schools? Would we use AI to teach, possibly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you think about the teaching process, that AI, it can collect data. When we think about the learning in the digital environment, it's easier to collect. You can see better who is falling behind, can provide the individual support, etc. So I think and of course the AI can interact. If you think about the teaching, it's about interacting with the teacher, and AI can be the teacher in many occasions. So it's a great opportunity.
Woo, AI being the teacher. So you're thinking about some sort of a system that looks technical, or a system that actually looks like a real person, some sort of humanoid.
I think it's far less simpler than it's like a simple chatbot that it's about I want to learn a new language, so I need to chat with somebody, or I need to actually speak with somebody, so I can speak with AI rather than with the human teacher. So it's easy to have a conversation. It can correct you. There is no emotion. You don't need to be afraid of the teacher like we were at school. So it's much greater. So sorry about my old teachers, but but anyway. So I think there are so many benefits, but at the same time, I think it's very important that we are transparent about the use of AI, not only in education, but also if people actually are chatting with the chatbot, and whether it is in the teaching situation or in customer service, if you think that it's a human, then later on you find out it's an AI, it's a chatbot, you might become even angry, you might be disappointed. Same applies for even to our Facebook feed, that people might not have been aware that AI is actually sorting out what you see and what you don't see, and once you realize that, you might become disappointed. So it's all about being transparent. When we use AI, let's be transparent. Let's explain how it works in a simple terms, not in a technical terms. So I think that's a key.
Well, that sounds good to me for somebody who isn't a computer scientist. Explain to me in simple terms sounds very good.
I actually had another comment that I wanted to add to the education thought, if you would.
Oh, do tell us. Go on. What's about our education?
The concept of adaptive education is absolutely something that is crucial, because there are many students learn differently, and being able to understand how the students learn and tune the teaching so that student can learn faster is an incredibly important use of AI. But I want to add that AI is actually being taught. There is a curriculum to teach AI to school children. You can go online and look at education resources, AI learning experiences for kindergartners, and you will find some wonderful examples of where AI is being taught to small kids. And, as some simple examples, can you make a chameleon that changes colors to match the background of the picture that it's on? Can you make a synthetic phone that will unlock when it recognizes your face? So there's an amazing, really cool elementary school education curriculum for learning about AI, so that you can do things like recognize that your Facebook feed was falsely tweaked with.
Karen, I know you're passionate about using AI in other fields. So, for instance, in different parts of business. And I know, Tero, you use AI sort of within business anyways. But Karen, tell me a bit more about where you would see AI being used in businesses.
So AI certainly has lots of applications for use in business, whether that's managing your supply chain or looking at your inventory and managing your inventory. There's some very nice work being done now in product design, being able to understand how parts of your product interact with each other, and then do the mapping to how the customers are reacting to that. It's all in there.
And Tero, you mentioned about I think earlier on about recruiting and jobs, and whether or not we'd trust that the right decisions had been made. So if I'm not selected for a job, do I trust that really was the right decision? But presumably, at some point, if we do understand how the AI is making the decisions, then we accept it in the same way that we accept, perhaps even better, that a human's in it, because they're hopefully, as Karen was saying, we could end up with less bias than we have at the moment from a human being recruiting. I mean, do you use this kind of stuff in your businesses, like in Silo or the other businesses that you're on the boards of?
Yes, the basically, if you look at the use of AI, it's very widespread. What is AI? It starts with the basic analytics and then moves to a more complex forms of AI. So most of the programs that we use, whether it is a recruiting software, whether it is a doctor using a diagnosis software, they have some kind of AI component, and it's a question: how do we make it better? How do we improve it and make it really kind of part of our everyday work? And it's happening more and more. And once it gets very complex, then the question is about how do we actually make it more transparent, more explainable, and in this way, people kind of are comfortable with using AI. They trust it, but also understand that regardless how much you teach AI, it's like a human. It occasionally makes mistakes because it's a nonlinear system. It's not the traditional if then else that always works right, but it is really nonlinear system that makes mistakes. And if I understand that you cannot give at the moment control of a car to AI system, a self-driving system, you need to be alert yourself. Then you are already much better off and can react into a situation. And same applies to a number of different AI systems. You cannot trust them blindly. You need to understand how do they work.
So we just need to make it more and more transparent, and the uptake presumably is just, the world is our oyster. Is that what we're saying?
That's right.
I would agree with that.
Fabulous. Well, look, Karen, Tero, thank you so much. I mean, I'm sure we're all going to experience a lot more artificial intelligence in the imminent future, and of course, what it can do for us in the coming few years. Thank you both for helping to open up your world of artificial intelligence and just being fascinating guests for Zero Pressure.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this podcast journey. It's great to have you on board. If this conversation has sparked any questions, or you'd like to ask me or our guests anything, please reach out to us on Twitter at Zero Pressure Pod, where we'll post answers. Your questions may even feature in the next episode. Here are some of the questions you sent in to us after the last episode. The first one I've got: are autonomous systems being used or considered in domestic law enforcement? And the answer is that law enforcement agencies in the United States increasingly have been adopting autonomous technologies, including the controversial use of drones to chase suspects in California, and the use of a DigiDog robot to investigate home invasions in New York. Such uses are still in early stages and trials, but use of drones is an area in particular we can expect to be developed and used more for law enforcement. Another question, what's the highest level of autonomy currently legal in a self-driving car? Well, it depends where. For instance, the United Kingdom is allowing vehicles with level 3 autonomy to drive on its roads towards the end of 2021. But level 3 autonomous driving systems are not yet allowed in the United States. Level 3 means a person's not driving the car themselves, but is ready to take control when necessary. In our next episode, we'll be talking about quantum computers and ask the question, when can we do something useful with a quantum computer? We'll explore the potential and true disruptiveness of the technology and its applications. Until then, let me leave you with the words of Nobel Laureate Daniel Kahneman on AI. It's very difficult to imagine that with sufficient data, there will remain things that only humans can do.